The sunset painted the rugged Montana landscape in hues of amber and gold as Vivian Clarke stood on the weathered porch of Holloway's general store, her threadbare carpetbag clutched tightly in trembling hands. The year was 1877, and at 23, she had traveled over 1,000 miles on a promise that had crumbled to dust upon her arrival. The man who had courted her through letters, who had sent for her with promises of marriage and a comfortable life in the West, had married another just 3 days before her stagecoach rolled into Whispering Pines. "Happens more often than you'd think, Mrs." Holloway had said with a sympathetic cluck of her tongue when Vivian had wandered into the store, confused and desperate after discovering her intended groom already had a wife. "Men get lonely out here and write to a dozen women, then marry whichever one arrives first." Now, as the last light of day faded, and the cool Montana evening settled around her shoulders like a heavy shawl, Vivian blinked back hot tears. Her meager savings wouldn't buy passage back east. She had no family waiting for her return, no one who would miss her if she vanished from the face of the earth. The orphanage had been glad to see the back of her when she'd aged out at 18, and the textile factory where she'd toiled for 5 years had already replaced her with younger hands. "Miss, store's closing now." Vivian turned to find Mrs. Holloway standing in the doorway, keys jangling in her plump hand. The older woman's expression softened as she took in Vivian's red-rimmed eyes and the defeated slump of her shoulders. I was wondering if you knew of anywhere I might stay tonight," Vivian said, her voice barely audible above the distant piano music drifting from the saloon down the street. Mrs. Holloway sighed. "Boarding house is full with the cattle buyers in town, and the hotel." She trailed off, both of them knowing Vivian couldn't afford even a single night at Whispering Pines' only hotel. The clip-clop of hooves drew their attention to the street, where a tall man on horseback approached. Even in the dimming light, Vivian could see that his broad shoulders were dusted with trail dirt, and his face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, came to a stop before the store. "Evening, Mrs. Holloway," the rider said, his voice deep and textured like well-worn leather. "Owen Fletcher. Thought you were out at the Circle F for another week at least," Mrs. Holloway replied, her tone warming considerably. The man, Owen, dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. As he stepped into the pool of lantern light spilling from the store windows, Vivian saw that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. His eyes, when they landed on her, were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Pa sent me for supplies. We've got extra hands coming to help with the spring branding." He touched the brim of his hat in greeting to Vivian, a gesture both courteous and questioning. Mrs. Holloway didn't miss the opening. "Owen, this is Miss Vivian Clarke. She's come all the way from Boston on account of that no-good Charlie Peterson, who saw fit to marry Betsy Williams 3 days ago." Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes. Vivian wanted to sink through the porch boards in mortification. Being abandoned was humiliating enough without having her circumstances announced to every passing stranger. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Clarke," Owen said simply, offering no pity or judgment in his steady gaze. "Miss Clarke needs a place to stay," Mrs. Holloway continued bluntly. "I was just telling her the boarding house is full up." "I'll be fine," Vivian interjected hastily. "Perhaps there's a church where I might. My sister's at the ranch," Owen interrupted quietly. "Sarah's about your age. We've got plenty of room." Vivian stared at him, taken aback by the offer. "I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition. Pa and I can't very well leave a lady with nowhere to go, and Sarah would skin me alive if she found out I had." A small smile softened his weathered features. "It's a decent ride, but thunder here can carry double just fine, Mrs." Holloway beamed as if she'd orchestrated the entire solution. "There you have it. The Fletchers are good people, Vivian. You couldn't be in better hands." Vivian hesitated, torn between propriety and necessity. She didn't know this man. Climbing onto a horse with him and riding off into the gathering darkness went against every rule of decorum she'd been taught. But the alternative was a night spent on the street in a town where she knew no one. As if sensing her internal struggle, Owen said, "You have my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm, Miss Clarke. And if you find the arrangement unsuitable after meeting my family, I'll bring you back to town tomorrow myself." There was something in his steady gaze that made Vivian believe him a fundamental decency that she hadn't seen in Charlie Peterson's florid letters filled with exaggerated promises. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," she said at last. "I accept your kind offer." Owen nodded once, then turned to Mrs. Holloway. "I'll come by for those supplies in the morning, if that's all right." Of course," the shopkeeper replied, clearly pleased with this turn of events. "I'll have everything ready." Before Vivian could reconsider, Owen was lifting her carpetbag and securing it to his saddle. He mounted the horse first, then extended a strong hand down to her. With a deep breath, Vivian placed her fingers in his and allowed him to pull her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. "Hold on tight," he instructed, and after a moment's hesitation, Vivian wrapped her arms around his waist, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him against the evening chill. As they rode away from town, the vast Montana sky unfurled above them, stars emerging like scattered diamonds against the deepening blue. Vivian had never seen such a sky in Boston, where buildings and smoke obscured the heavens. Despite her uncertainty, a small part of her thrilled at the wild beauty of this land. "I'm sorry about Peterson," Owen said after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "That's not how most men out here behave." "It seems I'm destined to make poor choices where men are concerned," Vivian replied, trying to keep her voice light despite the ache in her chest. "Not this time," Owen said simply. "The Fletchers keep their promises." They rode for nearly an hour, following a well-worn trail that wound through stands of pine and across open meadows. Eventually, the silhouette of a large ranch house appeared against the night sky, windows glowing with welcoming lamplight. As they approached, a woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Owen Fletcher, you had me worried sick. Pa rode in 2 hours ago saying you'd gone to town, and I thought—" She stopped short when she spotted Vivian. "Oh, you've brought company." Owen dismounted and helped Vivian down, her legs unsteady after the long ride. "Sarah, this is Miss Vivian Clarke. She's had a rough time of it in town. Miss Clarke, my sister, Sarah Fletcher." Sarah rushed forward, her initial surprise giving way to warm hospitality. "You poor thing, you must be exhausted. Come inside where it's warm. Have you eaten? We've got stew keeping hot on the stove." Before Vivian could respond, she found herself ushered into a spacious kitchen that smelled of freshly baked bread and savory meat. An older man, presumably Owen and Sarah's father, looked up from the table where he'd been reading a newspaper. "Pa, this is Miss Clarke," Owen said, setting down Vivian's carpetbag. "She came out from Boston to marry Charlie Peterson." The elder Fletcher's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Peterson." "But he just—" "Exactly," Owen cut in. Understanding dawned on the older man's face. He rose from his chair, revealing a tall frame that his son had clearly inherited. "James Fletcher, miss. Welcome to the Circle F." "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," Vivian said, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how to repay your hospitality." "Nonsense," Sarah declared, already ladling stew into a bowl. "We're just decent folk doing what's right. Now sit and eat before you fall over." That night, in a small but clean bedroom that Sarah explained had belonged to their mother before she passed, Vivian lay awake staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. The events of the day swirled in her mind: the devastating discovery of Charlie's betrayal, the terror of finding herself alone and friendless in a strange town, and the unexpected salvation offered by the Fletcher family. What would become of her now? She had no money, no prospects, and no skills that would be particularly valued in this rough country. The textile mills of Boston had taught her to operate machinery that didn't exist out here. What place was there for a woman like her in the wild Montana territory? Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were troubled by faceless men making promises they never intended to keep, and by the memory of strong arms holding her steady as they rode through the darkness. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through curtains that fluttered in the breeze. For a moment, Vivian was disoriented, Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, saving her best for whatever might come next, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty save for Owen, who sat at the table with a cup of coffee, studying what appeared to be a ledger. He looked up when she entered, and Vivian was struck again by the clarity of his blue eyes. "Good morning," he said, rising from his chair. "Sarah's gone to gather eggs and Pa's checking on a heifer that's due to calve. There's coffee in the pot if you'd like some." "Thank you," Vivian replied, suddenly shy in the bright light of day. She poured herself a cup, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Did you sleep well?" Owen asked, closing the ledger. "Yes, thank you. Your family has been incredibly kind." Owen shrugged, as if taking in stranded women was an everyday occurrence at the Circle F. "Sarah's planning to ride into town later. She can help you sort out your situation if you'd like." "My situation," Vivian echoed hollowly. What situation was there to sort? She had nowhere to go, no one waiting for her. Something in her tone must have conveyed her despair, because Owen's expression softened. "Miss Clarke, please call me Vivian." "Vivian, then, what were your plans before Peterson showed his true colors?" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "I was to be a rancher's wife. Charlie wrote that he had a prosperous spread south of town, with a fine house and servants. He said he needed a proper Boston lady to help him entertain business associates and manage his household." The memory of those letters, read and reread until the paper grew thin at the creases, brought fresh pain. It was all lies. "Mrs. Holloway told me he has a small cabin and barely enough cattle to call himself a rancher." Owen's jaw tightened. Men like that give the rest of us a bad name. The back door opened and Sarah entered carrying a basket of eggs. Her face brightened when she saw Vivian. "You're up. I hope you're hungry. I'm making flapjacks." As Sarah bustled about the kitchen, chattering about the day ahead, Vivian found herself warming to the young woman's infectious energy. Though they were of similar age, Sarah possessed a confidence and capability that Vivian envied. Here was a woman who knew her place in the world and moved through it with assurance. "We need to get you some proper clothes," Sarah announced, eyeing Vivian's city dress. "You can't go riding in that." "Riding?" Vivian asked, confused. "Well, of course, how else will you see the ranch?" "Unless you'd rather stay inside all day, which would be a terrible waste with weather this fine." "I don't know how to ride," Vivian admitted, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Sarah waved this away as if it were inconsequential. "Owen's the best teacher in 3 counties. Taught me when I was barely tall enough to reach the stirrups." Owen, who had been quietly drinking his coffee during this exchange, looked up. "I'd be happy to teach you if you're interested." The idea terrified and thrilled Vivian in equal measure. "I suppose I should learn if I'm to stay in Montana." "Are you?" Sarah asked, pausing in her breakfast preparations. "Going to stay, I mean," Vivian stared down at her coffee cup. "I don't have the means to leave at present." A silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the sizzle of batter hitting the hot griddle. It was James Fletcher who spoke next, having entered unnoticed during their conversation. "We could use help around here," he said matter-of-factly. "Sarah's been running herself ragged since Mrs. Holloway stopped coming out to help with the housekeeping. We'd pay fair wages, provide room and board." Vivian looked up in surprise. "You're offering me employment, if you're willing," James nodded. "It's not Boston and the work's not easy, but it's honest." "I don't know what to say," Vivian murmured, overwhelmed by this unexpected opportunity. "Say yes," Sarah urged, flipping a perfectly golden flapjack. "It would be wonderful to have another woman around the place." Vivian looked from Sarah's eager face to James's kind eyes and finally to Owen, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. What choice did she really have? Return to town with no money and no prospects, accept charity from strangers indefinitely. "Yes," she said finally. "Thank you." "I accept." "Excellent," Sarah exclaimed. "Now, let's eat before these get cold, and then we'll find you something suitable to wear for your first riding lesson." After breakfast, Vivian found herself in the barn, dressed in a borrowed pair of Sarah's trousers, scandalous by Boston standards, and a comfortable shirt, facing a gentle-looking mare with apprehension. "This is Daisy," Owen said, stroking the horse's neck. "She's patient with beginners." "She looks very Tall, Vivian observed nervously. Owen laughed, the sound warming something inside her. She's actually one of our smaller horses. Here, hold out your hand flat like this. He demonstrated, and Vivian copied him, gasping softly when Daisy's velvety muzzle tickled her palm in search of treats. She likes you, Owen said, and Vivian couldn't help but smile. I like her too, she admitted. The next hour passed in a blur of instruction as Owen taught her how to approach the horse, how to saddle and bridle her, though he did most of the actual work, and finally, how to mount. His hands were strong and sure at her waist as he helped her up, and for a breathless moment, Vivian was acutely aware of his closeness. Keep your back straight, he instructed, stepping back once she was settled in the saddle. That's it. Hold the reins like this, not too tight, but firm. By the end of the lesson, Vivian had managed to walk Daisy in a large circle around the corral, with Owen leading them. It was hardly an impressive feat of horsemanship, but the sense of accomplishment she felt was immense. You're a natural, Owen told her as he helped her dismount, her legs wobbling beneath her from the unfamiliar exercise. I think we both know that's not true, Vivian laughed, but thank you for the kindness. It's not kindness, he insisted. You've got good instincts. Most city folk are too stiff, too afraid. You trusted Daisy, and she knew it. Coming from Owen, who clearly lived and breathed ranching, the compliment meant more than he could know. Days turned into weeks as Vivian settled into life at the Circle F. She learned to cook on a wood-burning stove, to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter months ahead, to mend shirts and darn socks with neat, tiny stitches. Sarah proved to be not only an employer but a friend, teaching Vivian the domestic skills she'd never fully mastered in Boston, where her factory work had left little time for homemaking. The riding lessons continued as well, with Owen patiently guiding her progress. Vivian graduated from walking to trotting, and eventually to a cautious canter that left her breathless with exhilaration. On clear afternoons, when her chores were done, Owen would saddle Daisy and Thunder and take her exploring the vast Fletcher property. This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch, he told her one golden afternoon in late May as they sat beside a clear stream that bubbled over smooth stones. Wildflowers dotted the surrounding meadow, and in the distance, the mountains rose in majestic splendor against the blue sky. I can see why, Vivian replied, breathing in the sweet mountain air. It's beautiful. My mother used to bring us here for picnics when we were small, Owen said, a hint of sadness in his voice. She loved wildflowers. Said they were tougher than they looked, surviving winter snows and summer droughts to bloom year after year. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Owen plucked a delicate purple flower and twirled it between his fingers. She's been gone 10 years now. Fever took her before the doctor could get to the ranch. I'm sorry, Vivian said softly. I lost my parents when I was very young. I barely remember them. Owen looked at her, his expression gentle. That's its own kind of sorrow. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the horses grazing nearby, the stream providing a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. Do you ever regret coming west? Owen asked suddenly. Vivian considered the question carefully. I regret trusting Charlie Peterson, she said at last. But no, I don't regret coming to Montana. If I'd stayed in Boston, I'd still be working 14 hours a day in a factory where the air was so filled with cotton fibers you could barely breathe. I'd still be living in a boarding house with 6 other women, sharing a single cold water tap. And now, Owen's blue eyes held hers. Now I can ride a horse, she smiled. I can identify wildflowers and bird calls. I know what the mountains look like at sunrise and how the air smells before a storm. No, Owen, I don't regret coming west. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a warmth that made Vivian's heart beat faster. For a moment, she thought he might say more, might reach for her hand or move closer. Instead, he stood and offered her a hand up. We should head back. Pa will be wondering where we've gotten to. Vivian took his hand, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed over her. She was being foolish. Owen Fletcher was kind to her because it was in his nature to be kind, not because he felt anything special for her. She was an employee of his family's ranch, nothing more. But as they rode home side by side, Vivian couldn't help stealing glances at his profile, strong and handsome against the afternoon sun, and wondering what it might be like to be more than just the Fletchers' housekeeper. June brought the full intensity of ranch life as neighboring outfits joined forces for the summer cattle drive. Cowboys from miles around converged on the Circle F, setting up a temporary camp near the main house. Vivian and Sarah worked from dawn until well after dusk, cooking enormous meals to feed the hungry men. Miss Vivian, a young cowhand named Billy, called out as she served up slices of apple pie one evening, "This is the best pie I've ever tasted. You looking for a husband?" "Because I'd propose right here and now for cooking like this." The other men hooted with laughter, and Vivian felt her cheeks flame. Before she could respond, Owen's voice cut through the banter. "Eat your pie and keep your proposals to yourself, Wilson," he said, his tone light but with an unmistakable edge. "Miss Clarke's not interested in marrying some saddle tramp who can't even read." "Just funning," Billy muttered, ducking his head sheepishly. Later, as Vivian was washing dishes, Owen appeared beside her with a towel in hand. "I'm sorry about Wilson," he said, taking a wet plate from her and drying it carefully. "He's young and doesn't think before he speaks." "There's no need to apologize," Vivian replied, scrubbing at a stubborn bit of dried gravy. "He meant no harm." Owen was silent for a moment, focusing intently on drying each dish she handed him. "Still, you shouldn't have to fend off that kind of talk. You came out here to be a wife, not to be teased by cowhands." Something in his tone made Vivian look up sharply. "I came out here because I was foolish enough to believe the promises of a man I'd never met," she corrected. "And while I may have come to be a wife, I've found I'm capable of being much more than that." Owen met her gaze, surprise evident in his expression. "I didn't mean, I know you didn't," Vivian softened her tone, "but I'm not the same woman who stepped off that stagecoach 2 months ago, Owen. That woman thought her only value lay in being chosen by a man. She was wrong." A slow smile spread across Owen's face, transforming his features. "Yes, she was," he agreed quietly. "Absolutely wrong." The intensity of his gaze made Vivian's hands tremble, and she nearly dropped the plate she was washing. What was happening between them? Was she imagining the change in how he looked at her? Before she could untangle her thoughts, Sarah burst into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Vivian, Pa says we're to ride into town tomorrow for supplies. We'll need extra flour and sugar for all these hungry men, and he's promised we can visit the mercantile for fabric. Isn't that wonderful? We haven't had new dresses in ages." Owen's expression closed, the moment between them evaporating like morning dew under the summer sun. "I'll finish up here," he said, taking the dish rag from Vivian's hands. "You two should make your list for town." As Vivian followed Sarah from the kitchen, she couldn't help glancing back at Owen, standing alone at the sink, his shoulders rigid beneath his cotton shirt. Something had shifted between them, but whether toward closeness or distance, she couldn't tell. The trip to town the next day was a welcome break from the relentless pace of ranch work. Vivian had only been to Whispering Pines once since her arrival, and she was surprised to find she viewed it with completely different eyes now. What had seemed intimidating and foreign that first evening now appeared quaint and familiar. "Mrs. Holloway will be beside herself when she sees you," Sarah predicted as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "She's been pestering Owen for news of you every time he comes to town." "News of me?" Vivian asked, surprised. "Whatever for," Sarah laughed. "Because you're the most interesting thing to happen around here in months. A Boston lady who came west to marry one man and ended up working for another. It's better than those novels Mrs. Holloway orders from back east." Vivian hadn't considered how her situation might appear to others, and the thought made her uncomfortable. "I hope people don't think what?" Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. "That there's something improper about my living at the Circle F." Sarah's expression cleared. "Oh. No, nothing like that. Everyone knows Pa and I are there as chaperones. Besides, Owen's reputation is above reproach. He's turned down half the eligible women in the county." This last piece of information caught Vivian's attention despite herself. "Has he really?" Sarah nodded, checking the wagon's tether. "Broke poor Eliza Thompson's heart last Christmas when he wouldn't court her, and her father owns the largest ranch in the territory. Pa was furious, said Owen was being too particular by half. Perhaps he simply doesn't wish to marry, Vivian suggested, trying to sound casual. Sarah gave her a knowing look. Oh, he wishes to marry all right. He's just waiting for the right woman. Someone who sees the land the way he does, who understands that ranching isn't just a way to make money, it's a way of life. Before Vivian could respond to this intriguing statement, James Fletcher approached, signaling they were ready to depart. The journey to town took most of the morning, with James pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the early days of settlement. By the time they reached Whispering Pines, Vivian felt she had a much deeper understanding of the Fletchers' connection to this wild, beautiful country. As predicted, Mrs. Holloway was delighted to see Vivian. "Just look at you," she exclaimed, taking in Vivian's sun-kissed complexion and the confident way she carried herself. "Montana air agrees with you, my dear." "The Fletchers have been very kind," Vivian replied, helping Sarah select bolts of fabric. "Kind, yes," Mrs. Holloway said with a meaningful glance, "especially young Mr. Fletcher, from what I hear." Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Owen has been a perfect gentleman." "Of course he has," the shopkeeper agreed. "That's just what I'd expect. But gentlemen can also be smitten, can't they, Mrs. Holloway?" Sarah interrupted, laughing. "Don't tease poor Vivian. She's had quite enough of men's attentions to last her a lifetime." The shopkeeper looked chastened. "You're right, of course. Forgive an old woman's romanticism, my dear." They completed their shopping and were loading the wagon when Vivian spotted a familiar figure across the street, Charlie Peterson, emerging from the saloon with a woman on his arm. Her heart gave a painful lurch, not from any lingering affection, but from the sharp memory of humiliation. Charlie saw her at the same moment and froze, his florid face paling visibly even at a distance. The woman with him, presumably his new wife, followed his gaze and frowned, tugging at his arm. "Vivian," Sarah had noticed her distress. "What is it?" "That's him," Vivian whispered. "Charlie Peterson." Sarah's eyes narrowed, the nerve of that man, showing his face in broad daylight after what he did. To Vivian's horror, Charlie was crossing the street toward them, his wife trailing reluctantly behind. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing thinning hair plastered to his scalp. "Miss Clarke," he said, his voice as oily as she remembered from their brief meeting. "I had heard you were still in the area. I trust you're well." Vivian stared at him, this man who had brought her across the country on false pretenses and then abandoned her without a second thought. In Boston, she would have murmured some polite nothing and hurried away, avoiding confrontation. But she wasn't in Boston anymore. "I am very well, Mr. Peterson," she said clearly, lifting her chin. "Better than I would have been had your original plans for me succeeded." Charlie's face reddened. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Sarah stepped forward, eyes flashing. "You have no right to speak to Miss Clarke after the despicable way you behaved. If my brother were present, you'd be eating dirt for your trouble." The mention of Owen seemed to give Charlie pause. He glanced nervously up and down the street. "Your brother? You mean Owen Fletcher?" "The very same," Sarah confirmed with obvious satisfaction. "Miss Clarke is under our protection now." Charlie took a step back, replacing his hat with shaking hands. "No offense meant, ladies, just being neighborly. Come along, Betsy." The woman, who had been watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity, allowed herself to be led away, though she cast one last assessing look at Vivian over her shoulder. "The absolute gall of that man," Sarah fumed as they watched the couple retreat. "Are you all right, Vivian?" Vivian took a deep breath, surprised to find that she was indeed all right. Seeing Charlie had been jarring, but she felt none of the devastation she might have expected. Instead, she felt a strange sense of gratitude. If not for his deception, she would never have found her way to the Circle F, never have discovered her own strength, never have met Owen. "I'm fine," she assured Sarah. "Truly." "You're better than fine," Sarah declared, linking her arm through Vivian's. "You're magnificent." "Did you see his face when you stood up to him? I thought he might faint dead away." Vivian couldn't help but laugh at Sarah's dramatic retelling as they rejoined James at the wagon. The encounter with Charlie, rather than ruining her day, had somehow liberated her. The last lingering tendrils of resentment and humiliation had dissipated, leaving her feeling lighter than she had in months. On the journey back to the ranch, as the wagon bounced along the rutted road, and the late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, Vivian realized with sudden clarity that she was happy. Despite everything, the betrayal, the uncertainty, the hard work, she was genuinely happy here in this wild country with these good people. And if her thoughts kept returning to a pair of clear blue eyes and the quiet strength of a man who saw her as she truly was, well, that was a matter to contemplate another day. They returned to the Circle F to find the ranch in an uproar. 2 of the hands had been injured when a group of cattle spooked during branding, and the bunkhouse had been converted into a makeshift infirmary. Dr. Miller, summoned from town, was just finishing setting a broken arm when their wagon pulled in. "Nothing life-threatening," the doctor assured James as they unloaded supplies. "Johnson's arm will heal clean with proper rest, and Edwards has some nasty bruises but nothing broken. Their lucky Fletcher was there to pull them out of the way." "Owen," Sarah asked, alarmed, "is he hurt?" "Some cuts and bruises. Refused to let me look at them until I'd seen to the others. Stubborn as his father, that one." Vivian's heart clenched at the thought of Owen injured. Without waiting for further explanation, she hurried toward the main house, where she found him seated at the kitchen table, his shirt off, attempting to clean a long gash on his upper arm. "Owen," she gasped, taking in the sight of his bare torso covered in dirt and blood. He looked up, surprise giving way to something warmer when he saw her. "You're back. You're hurt," she countered, moving to his side and taking the cloth from his hand. "Let me." He didn't protest as she dipped the cloth in the basin of water and began gently cleaning the wound. Vivian tried to focus on the task at hand rather than on the fact that this was the closest she'd ever been to him, or that his skin was warm beneath her fingers, or that the muscles of his shoulders and chest were firm and well-defined from years of physical labor. "What happened?" she asked, partly to distract herself from these dangerous observations. "Longhorn spooked during branding, started a small stampede. Johnson and Edwards were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you," Vivian pressed, noting the bruises forming along his ribs. Owen shrugged, then winced at the movement. "I was closer to them than anyone else." "So you risked yourself to save them," she translated, applying salve to the clean wound. "Anyone would have done the same." Vivian shook her head, a rush of emotion making her voice unsteady. "Not anyone, Owen." "You." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment the kitchen disappeared, the ranch disappeared, the whole world narrowed to just the 2 of them. Owen's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his arm. "Vivian," he began, his voice low and rough. The back door banged open as Sarah and James entered, carrying supplies from the wagon. Owen dropped his hand and Vivian stepped back, her cheeks burning. "Owen Fletcher," Sarah exclaimed, taking in his injuries. "Dr. Miller said you refused treatment. What were you thinking?" As Sarah fussed over her brother, Vivian busied herself putting away the supplies, trying to calm her racing heart. What had almost happened in that moment before they were interrupted? And what would she have done if Owen had said whatever he'd been about to say? That night, Vivian lay awake long after the household had gone quiet, replaying the day's events in her mind. The encounter with Charlie, which had once seemed so significant, now paled in comparison to the memory of Owen's blue eyes looking into hers, his hand warm over her own. She was falling in love with him. The realization didn't shock her as much as it should have. Perhaps some part of her had known for weeks, had recognized in Owen Fletcher the kind of man she'd always hoped to find but never believed existed. Kind but strong, gentle but fierce in defense of those he cared for, a man whose word was his bond and whose heart was as vast as the land he loved. But did he feel anything for her beyond kindness and friendship? Sarah seemed to think so, and Mrs. Holloway had hinted as much. Yet Owen himself had given her no clear indication of deeper feelings, had made no declarations, had offered no courtship. Perhaps it was for the best. Vivian had come to Montana to be a wife and found herself instead. She had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, had built a life that was meaningful and satisfying. Did she want to risk all that on feelings that might not be returned? Sleep finally claimed her, but her dreams were filled with blue eyes and the phantom touch of a strong hand covering hers. The summer cattle drive departed the next morning, taking most of the cowhands and Owen with it. They would be gone for nearly 2 weeks, driving the herd to the railhead at Helena. The ranch seemed eerily quiet in their absence, the daily rhythms altered by the sudden reduction in mouths to feed and work to oversee. "I've been thinking," Sarah said one afternoon as they hung laundry in the warm July sunshine, "that we should have a dance when the men return." "A dance?" Vivian echoed, pinning one of James's shirts to the line. "To celebrate a successful drive," Sarah nodded. "We used to have them often when Mother was alive. She loved music and dancing. We'd invite all the neighboring ranches and she'd bake for days." "It sounds lovely," Vivian said, trying to picture the usually quiet ranch filled with music and laughter. "It was." Sarah's eyes grew distant with memory. "After she died, we stopped. It didn't seem right somehow, but it's been 10 years and I think she'd want us to dance again." Vivian squeezed her friend's hand. "Then we should dance." The idea took hold, and soon the two women were deep in preparations. They baked pies and cakes that could be stored until the celebration, cleaned the barn where the dancing would take place, and sent invitations to neighboring ranches via the weekly mail coach. "Do you think Owen will approve?" Vivian asked one evening as they polished the Fletcher family silver, unused since Sarah's mother had died. "Owen," Sarah looked surprised by the question. "It was his idea, but you said," "I said I'd been thinking about it, which is true, but Owen mentioned it to Pa before he left. Said it was time the Circle F hosted a proper gathering again." Vivian absorbed this information, turning it over in her mind. Why would Owen suggest a dance after so many years? And why now? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a letter, delivered by a cowhand from a neighboring ranch who was passing through. It was addressed to Vivian in a bold, masculine hand that she recognized immediately as Owen's. She waited until she was alone in her room that night to open it, her hands trembling slightly as she broke the seal. "Dear Vivian," it began without preamble, "I hope this finds you well and that the ranch hasn't fallen to pieces in our absence. The drive goes smoothly, though I find myself missing the comforts of home more acutely than in years past. Or perhaps it is not the comforts I miss, but the company. Sarah will have told you of the dance we plan upon our return. What she may not have told you is that it was my suggestion, and that I had a particular purpose in mind when I proposed it. I am not a man of many words, Vivian. The land speaks more eloquently than I ever could, and I have always let my actions stand in place of speeches. But some things must be said, even by a tongue-tied rancher who finds it easier to break wild horses than to express what is in his heart. From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, something in me recognized something in you. Not at first sight, perhaps I am not so fanciful as that. But in the weeks that followed, as I watched you face each challenge with courage and grace, as I saw the way you came to love this land almost as much as those born to it, as I witnessed your transformation from a lost Boston lady to a woman who knows her own worth, I found myself thinking of you in ways that go beyond friendship or the proper relationship between employer and employee. I have no right to ask anything of you. You came to Montana to be a bride and found betrayal instead. You have built a life for yourself here through your own determination and strength. Perhaps that is enough for you, and if so, I will respect your choice and speak no more of these matters. But if there is any chance that you might someday look upon me as more than your employer's son, more than a friend or teacher, I ask only for the opportunity to court you properly, beginning with a dance beneath the summer stars. Until our return, I remain yours faithfully, Owen Fletcher. Vivian read the letter 3 times, her heart beating so loudly she was certain Sarah would hear it through the wall that separated their rooms. Owen had feelings for her. Owen wanted to court her. Owen thought she was courageous and graceful and strong. She pressed the letter to her chest, a smile spreading across her face that felt too big to contain. The doubts and questions that had plagued her these past weeks dissolved in the face of his honest words. Whatever happened next, she knew now that she wasn't alone in her feelings. Sleep eluded her that night, but for once, Vivian didn't mind. She lay awake watching the stars through her window, imagining Owen somewhere beneath those same stars, thinking of her as she was thinking of him. The days until the cattle drive's return seemed to crawl by at an agonizing pace. Vivian threw herself into preparations for the dance with renewed enthusiasm, wanting everything to be perfect for Owen's homecoming. She even convinced Sarah to help her alter one of her dresses, a simple blue cotton that Sarah insisted brought out the color of her eyes. "Not that Owen will notice what you're wearing," Sarah teased as they worked. "That man has eyes only for your face these days." Vivian blushed but didn't deny it. "Did you know about his feelings, I mean?" Sarah laughed. "Vivian, everyone knew. Pa and I have been watching him moon over you for months. Why do you think Pa offered you the position here? He saw the way Owen looked at you that very first night and decided you weren't going anywhere if he had anything to say about it. But that was before Owen and I even knew each other." "Pa's got good instincts about people," Sarah shrugged. "He said you had the Fletcher look about you. The Fletcher look, like you belong here, like the land speaks to you." Vivian thought about the letter in her dresser drawer, about Owen's words. "The land speaks more eloquently than I ever could." Perhaps he and his father weren't so different after all. The cattle drive returned on a Wednesday afternoon, the distant sound of lowing cattle and shouting men alerting the women to their approach. Vivian's hands shook as she smoothed her hair and straightened her apron, nervous energy making her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "You look fine," Sarah assured her with a knowing smile. "Better than fine, but if you keep fussing, you'll wear a hole in that apron." They stood on the porch, watching as the men rode into the yard, dust-covered and weary but triumphant. James was in the lead, with Owen just behind him. When Owen spotted Vivian, his whole face transformed, fatigue giving way to a smile that made her heart flip in her chest. He dismounted in one fluid motion and handed the reins to a nearby hand, never taking his eyes from her. As he approached the porch, Vivian was struck by how right he looked here, how perfectly he fit into this landscape that had become her home. "Welcome back," she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "It's good to be home," he replied, and the way he looked at her made it clear that home meant more than just the ranch. James cleared his throat loudly. "Sarah, I believe we're needed in the barn, something about arrangements for Saturday." Sarah rolled her eyes at her father's transparent excuse but followed him, leaving Owen and Vivian alone on the porch. For a moment neither spoke. Then, simultaneously, "I got your letter. You look beautiful." They both laughed, the tension breaking. Owen stepped closer, close enough that Vivian could see the tiny flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the sun-weathered creases at their corners. "I meant what I wrote," he said quietly. "Every word." "I know," Vivian replied. "And I feel the same way, Owen." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, slow at first, then blazing with joy. "You do?" she nodded, suddenly shy despite the certainty in her heart. "I do." Owen took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Then may I have the honor of the first dance on Saturday night, Miss Clarke?" "And every dance after that, Mr. Fletcher," she answered, her voice catching on a laugh that was half joy, half wonder at how completely her life had changed in the span of a few short months. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both old-fashioned and thrilling. "I'll hold you to that promise." Saturday evening arrived clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. The barn had been transformed with lanterns and bunting, a makeshift dance floor cleared in the center. A trio of musicians from town fiddle, guitar, and banjo set up in one corner, tuning their instruments as guests began to arrive. Vivian surveyed their handiwork with satisfaction, adjusting a vase of wildflowers on one of the refreshment tables. Her blue dress, freshly altered with Sarah's help, fitted her perfectly, and she'd woven matching ribbons into her upswept hair. "You've outdone yourself," a voice said behind her, and she turned to find Owen watching her, dressed in his best clothes, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. "We all did," she corrected, including Sarah and James in her gesture. "It was a group effort. It reminds me of when my mother was alive," he said softly. "She loved bringing people together like this." Sarah said the same thing. "I wish I could have known her." Owen's expression grew thoughtful. "She would have liked you very much." Before Vivian could respond, the musicians struck up a lively tune and the floor began to fill with dancers. Owen held out his hand to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I believe you promised me the first dance, Miss Clarke." Vivian placed her hand in his without hesitation. "So I did, Mr. Fletcher." Owen led her onto the floor with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. As they joined the other couples, Vivian realized with a start that everyone was watching them, the neighboring ranchers and their wives, the cowhands, the townspeople who had made the journey out to the Circle F. Her cheeks warmed under the scrutiny. "They're staring," she whispered to Owen as he guided her through the steps of the dance. "Of course they are," he replied, unconcerned. "You're the most beautiful woman here." "That's not it," she protested. "They're curious about us." Owen's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Let them be curious. I'm not hiding how I feel about you, Vivian." The open declaration sent a thrill through her. For so long, she had been the woman no one chose, not the orphanage directors who passed her over for adoption time and again, not the factory foremen who promoted others with less experience, not even Charlie Peterson, who had chosen another woman before she could arrive to claim his false promises. But now here was Owen Fletcher choosing her openly, proudly, in front of the entire community. The realization brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Vivian," Owen's voice was concerned. "Have I upset you?" She shook her head, blinking away the moisture. "No, not at all. I'm just happy." His expression softened with understanding. "So am I." They danced every dance together that night, lost in their own world even as the barn filled with neighbors and friends. When they finally stepped outside for a breath of air, the moon was high overhead, casting silver light across the ranch yard. "Walk with me," Owen asked, offering his arm. Vivian took it, and they strolled away from the noise and light of the barn toward the quiet darkness of the surrounding pastures. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, and she shivered slightly. Without a word, Owen removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The wool was warm from his body and carried his scent, leather and pine, and something uniquely him. "Better?" he asked. "Much," she nodded, drawing the jacket closer around her. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the music from the barn growing fainter with distance. When they reached a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings, Owen stopped. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he said, gazing out at the silvered landscape. "You can see the whole ranch from here, the house, the barn, the north pasture, even the creek where we went that first time." Vivian followed his gaze, seeing the Circle F as he saw it, not just buildings and land, but a living, breathing entity that had been shaped by generations of Fletcher hands and hearts. "It's beautiful, Owen." "It is," he agreed, turning to face her, "but it's also hard." "Ranching isn't an easy life, Vivian. There are droughts and blizzards, predators and cattle thieves. There are years when the crops fail and the cattle prices drop. It's not Boston." "I know that," she said quietly. "I've been here long enough to understand what this life entails." "And yet you stay." "I stay because I want to," Vivian replied with simple honesty. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere, with someone." Owen's eyes were intensely blue even in the moonlight. "Vivian Clarke, I have never met a woman like you. You came west on a dream that turned to dust, and instead of breaking, you built something new. You learned to ride and cook and mend as if you'd been doing it all your life. You brought laughter back to our home and light back to our lives. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days making you as happy as you've made me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single small diamond. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Pa gave it to me before the dance tonight, said it was time it was worn again." Vivian's breath caught in her throat as Owen dropped to one knee before her, the moonlight silvering his dark hair. "I'm not asking you to be a rancher's wife, Vivian. I'm asking you to be my partner in everything, in work and rest, in joy and sorrow, in this life we build together. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down Vivian's cheeks now, but they were tears of joy, of a happiness so complete it couldn't be contained. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Owen. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms. When his lips met hers, Vivian felt as if all the pieces of her life, the sorrows and disappointments, the journey west, the betrayal that had led her to the circle F had been leading to this moment, this man, this love. When they finally broke apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "I've been wanting to do that for months," he admitted. "What took you so long?" she teased, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I wanted to be sure you were staying for the right reasons," he replied seriously. "Not because you had nowhere else to go, but because you wanted to be here, with me." Vivian's heart swelled with love for this man who had considered her feelings so carefully, who had given her time to find herself before asking her to share her life with his. "I've never been chosen before," she said softly, voicing the pain that had followed her from Boston. "Not by family, not by employers who valued my work, certainly not by Charlie Peterson." Owen cupped her face in his hands, his eyes fierce with emotion. "I'm choosing you, Vivian Clarke. I'm choosing you every day from now on, for as long as we both shall live." The simple vow, spoken beneath the vast Montana sky with only the stars as witnesses, meant more to Vivian than any formal ceremony could. This was their covenant, their promise to each other. "And I choose you, Owen Fletcher," she replied, sealing the words with another kiss. They returned to the dance hand in hand, Vivian's ring catching the light from the lanterns as they entered the barn. Sarah spotted them first, her eyes widening as she took in their clasped hands and the telltale glint on Vivian's finger. With a squeal of delight, she rushed toward them, embracing Vivian tightly. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I just knew it." "Oh, Vivian, we're going to be sisters." James approached more sedately, but his eyes were bright with approval as he clapped his son on the shoulder. "Well done, boy," he said gruffly. "Well done indeed." Word spread quickly through the gathering, and soon they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations. Even Mrs. Holloway, who had made the journey from town despite her arthritic knees, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I knew from the moment I saw you two together that night at the store," she told Vivian. "There was something special there, plain as day." As the celebration continued around them, Vivian found herself watching the faces of her new neighbors and friends, marveling at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely factory worker in Boston, dreaming of a different life. Now she stood in a Montana barn, engaged to a man she loved with her whole heart, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her as one of their own. The wedding took place in September, when the aspen trees had turned to gold and the first crisp hint of autumn cooled the summer air. They chose to hold the ceremony outdoors, in the meadow by the creek where Owen had first shown Vivian his favorite spot on the ranch. Sarah helped Vivian make her wedding dress, a simple gown of ivory silk ordered specially from Mrs. Holloway's store, with lace trim that had once adorned Mrs. Fletcher's own wedding dress. As they worked, Sarah shared stories of her mother, helping Vivian feel connected to the woman who should have been her mother-in-law. "She would have loved all of this," Sarah said as they put the finishing touches on the dress the night before the wedding. "The outdoor ceremony, the wildflowers, the way you and Owen look at each other when you think no one's watching." "I wish I could have known her," Vivian said, not for the first time. Sarah squeezed her hand. "In a way you do. Owen is so much like her, the same quiet strength, the same deep love for the land and the people on it. When you know him, you know a part of her." On the morning of the wedding, Vivian woke to sunshine streaming through her window and the distant sound of hammering as the men made final preparations for the celebration. This would be her last day in this room, her last day as Vivian Clarke. Tomorrow she would move into the master bedroom with Owen, beginning their life together as husband and wife. The thought brought a flutter of nerves and excitement to her stomach. Despite the months of courtship, despite the certainty of her love for Owen and his for her, this final step into a shared future felt momentous. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Vivian, are you awake?" Sarah called. "Come in," Vivian replied, sitting up in bed. Sarah entered carrying a breakfast tray and a small package. "Owen asked me to give you this," she said, placing both on the bedside table. "He said it's a wedding gift to be opened before the ceremony, Curious, Vivian unwrapped the package to find a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she discovered it was a journal, the first page inscribed with Owen's bold handwriting. For Vivian, my love and my partner. May these pages hold the story of our life together, a story that begins today but has been written in the stars since before we met. All my love, Owen. The remaining pages were blank, waiting for the chapters of their shared life to unfold. Tears pricked at Vivian's eyes as she ran her fingers over his words. How like Owen to give her such a thoughtful gift, not jewelry or fine clothes, but the promise of a story they would write together. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Neighbors and friends gathered in the meadow, where wildflowers had been woven into arches and garlands. James Fletcher stood tall and proud beside his son as they waited for the bride's arrival. Sarah, serving as Vivian's maid of honor, walked ahead of her down a path strewn with flower petals when Vivian appeared, escorted by Dr. Miller, who had graciously agreed to give her away. A hush fell over the gathering. She wore her ivory gown with a crown of wildflowers in her upswept hair, carrying a bouquet of late summer blooms gathered from the meadow that morning. But it was her radiant smile, the joy that illuminated her face from within, that took Owen's breath away. Their vows were personal and heartfelt, spoken clearly for all to hear. Owen promised to cherish Vivian's strength and independence even as he vowed to protect and support her. Vivian promised to stand by Owen through all the challenges of ranch life, to be his partner in work and in love. I choose you today, Owen said, sliding the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, and I will choose you every day for the rest of our lives. And I choose you, Vivian replied, her voice steady despite the tears shimmering in her eyes, today and always. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Owen gathered Vivian into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept, and a future unfolding before them like the vast Montana sky. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, feasting and laughter. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the meadow, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Owen and Vivian moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from the community that had become their extended family. Mrs. Fletcher, Owen murmured in her ear as they shared a quiet moment away from the crowds, how does it feel to have a new name? Vivian smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all the joy she felt. It feels like belonging, she said simply. Like coming home. He kissed her then, beneath the star-strewn Montana sky, sealing their covenant once more. And Vivian knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, harsh winters or dry summers, good years or lean ones, they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the Circle F as Vivian stood on the porch, watching the approaching riders with a hand shading her eyes. Even at a distance, she could pick out Owen's form among the small group returning from the North pasture. 5 years of marriage had only deepened her ability to recognize him by the set of his shoulders, the way he sat a horse. Behind her, the screen door banged open, and 3-year-old James, named for his grandfather, barreled out onto the porch, his dark hair wild and his blue eyes so like his father's, wide with excitement. "Papa coming?" he asked, pressing against her skirts as he peered toward the riders. "Yes, sweetheart," Vivian confirmed, smoothing his unruly hair. "Papa's coming home." The toddler bounced on his toes, unable to contain his enthusiasm. At Vivian's side, Sarah laughed and scooped up her nephew, settling him on her hip. "Your papa will be here faster if you help me and your mama set the table for supper," she told him, a tactic that had worked countless times before. As Sarah carried the squirming boy back inside, Vivian's hand drifted to her still flat stomach, where their second child was just beginning to grow. She hadn't told Owen yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. But the familiar symptoms had confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks: their family was expanding once again. The thought filled her with quiet joy. The past 5 years had brought challenges, as ranch life always did: a harsh winter that nearly decimated their herd, a summer drought that threatened their crops, but they had weathered each storm together, emerging stronger for the trials they'd faced. And through it all, Owen had kept his promise. Each day, in 100 small ways, he chose her, bringing her wildflowers from the meadow where they'd exchanged their vows, listening to her ideas about ranch management with genuine interest, teaching their son to respect the strong, capable woman who was his mother. The riders drew closer, and Vivian could now make out the details of Owen's face, the beard he'd grown last winter and kept because she liked it, the laugh lines around his eyes that deepened with each passing year. When he spotted her on the porch, he raised a hand in greeting, then urged his horse ahead of the others, eager to close the distance between them. Vivian descended the porch steps to meet him, her heart quickening as it always did at the sight of him returning home. Owen dismounted in one fluid motion and handed the reins to one of the hands, his eyes never leaving Vivian's face. "Welcome home," she said, the words a ritual between them now. "It's good to be home," he replied, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that, even after 5 years, still made her knees weak. When they parted, she kept her arms around his waist, looking up into the face she loved more than any other in the world. "I have news," she said softly so only he could hear. Owen's eyes searched hers, a question in their blue depths. "Good news, I hope," Vivian nodded, taking his hand and placing it gently against her stomach. "The best kind." Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by a joy so pure it brought tears to Vivian's eyes. "Truly," he whispered. "Truly," she confirmed. "Come December, James will have a little brother or sister." Owen whooped with delight, lifting Vivian off her feet and spinning her in a circle that made her laugh despite her attempt at decorum. "Put me down, you wild man," she protested through her giggles. "What will the hands think?" "They'll think I'm the luckiest man in Montana territory," Owen declared, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. And they'd be right. From the porch came the patter of small feet as James, having escaped his aunt's supervision, ran toward them with outstretched arms. "Papa, Papa," Owen scooped up his son, tossing him high in the air before settling him securely in his arms. "There's my boy. Have you been helping your mama while I was gone?" James nodded solemnly. "I fed the chickens all by myself. Did you now? That's mighty fine work for a cowboy your size." Vivian watched them together, her heart full to bursting with love for this family they had created. As Owen carried James toward the house, chatting with the little boy about his adventures with the chickens, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had come west seeking a husband and found so much more: a partner, a home, a community, a purpose. The woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Whispering Pines 5 years ago, heartbroken and alone, would hardly recognize the Vivian Fletcher who stood in the yard of the Circle F today, confident, loved, essential to the workings of the ranch and the family that ran it. As if sensing her thoughts, Owen glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes finding hers across the yard. "Coming, Mrs. Fletcher," he called, his smile warming her from the inside out. "Always," she replied, hurrying to join her family on the porch of the home they had built together. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Owen's hand resting protectively over the place where their child grew, Vivian whispered the words that had become a covenant between them. "I choose you, Owen Fletcher, today and always." His arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple in a tender caress. "And I'm choosing you, Vivian Fletcher, every day from now on." In the quiet Montana night, surrounded by the love they had built together, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been searching for all her life: not just someone to choose her, but someone worthy of being chosen in return. A partner for the journey, whatever paths it might take. A love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together.